Welcome to WBC Faster Together, the LinkedIn Live series of Women Business Collaborative. I'm Gwen Young, Chief Operating Officer of Women Business Collaborative. And today we are joined by two of our key partners, Anna Mock, CEO of Ascend Leadership, and Kimber Matarazzo of Committee of 200, to talk about women CEOs in America. WBC is an unprecedented alliance of over 75 women business organizations and hundreds of business leaders, building a movement to achieve equal position, pay, and power for all women in business. Through collaboration, advocacy, action, and accountability, we are mobilizing thousands to create momentum and accelerate the pace of change. We live our commitment to DEI, and members of our leadership, our diverse board of directors, and advisory and leader councils include more than 34% people of color. Please check the chat for our 9 action initiatives through which we aim to accelerate change, and join our movement at wbcollaborative.org. Each week in this series, we offer different ways to advocate change and accelerate impact by presenting data, research, and best practices, by lifting up the power of women's voices for change, and by showing the importance of cross-generational collaboration and the allyship of men in the movement. So today we want to talk about our 2022 Women CEOs in America report, which was released on September 22nd, 2002. So welcome, Anna. Welcome, Kimber. Let's get started.
Great to be here.
Thank you, Gwen, for hosting us.
Thank you, Anna, for being here all the way from Thailand today as well. So let's start with the objectives of the report. When we came together to do this, we want to track, monitor the progress towards our goal of ensuring that women CEOs are over 15% of all CEOs in America. Kimber, why don't I start with you? Why is this report important?
The report is important, Gwen, because I want to make it known that this is our 3rd annual report. And usually when you see a report, it only measures the women in the Fortune 500. There really is not a lot of data out there encompassing women in the Fortune 500, women in the Russell 3000, and also entrepreneurs and women-owned businesses. So it was important for us to include all of them in this report and really highlight them and showcase them, because a lot of them they're names you've never even heard of because they're not published anywhere. We were able to get access to these women, so it's important to celebrate them.
Yeah, I think the fact that this has been a multi-year study, meaning we are tracking progress over time and analyzing that data is really important, right? The concept of progress, but as Kimber said, the broadness of the study is also important, that we're focusing on a broad range of companies and a broad range of leaders.
Yeah, I'd like to dive in a little bit because we have a couple stats, and Kimber, you studied, and we have this sort of what I will call the more typical stat of 8.8, or right now 9% of women CEOs in the Fortune 500 being CEOs. But we also hear a lot about women-owned businesses, women leaving the corporate workforce and running their own business, entrepreneurs. What does this look like in the private sector, and what does it look like in terms of entrepreneurship, women's leadership at the CEO level?
Well, so if we would look at, 50 years ago, there was only about 400,000 entrepreneurs, women-owned businesses. And today there's 12.3 million. That sounds like a big number, and we've made a lot of progress, but honestly, it's not that big because it's really only about 8% of employment and around 4% of revenue. So still very small. Women are really, coming strong out the gate from 20 to 21. We're so excited with the numbers because the numbers of women-owned businesses and starting businesses is big, especially for women of color and Latinas. So we're really excited with what we're seeing, but we still need to work on the progress. And that goes back to getting women more funding for starting their own businesses, all of that. But we're seeing great growth, which is fantastic.
Yeah, Anna, what are you seeing? And as Kimber said, we're hearing a lot, or you'll see in the headline, sort of growth for women of color entrepreneurs specifically. Like, what are you seeing, and where are you seeing the opportunities?
I think there's opportunities across the board, right? Whether it's larger organizations or more mid-sized organizations across the spectrum for all women, and with that, women of color. But as our study pointed out, in spite of all the contributions of women, I think women across companies of all sizes, aside from the women-owned founded companies, are still having lots of challenges as it relates to C-suite advancement. And that's what leads to then this really relatively small number of women CEOs, right? As in our study, we talked about the fact that women are about 39% of the global workforce. And then when you look at it in just a North America context, we're really only 24% of C-suite executives. And when you bring it down to women of color, it's only 4% of C-suite executives in North America companies. So that shows some of the gap, but also some of the big opportunities for advancement that are ahead of us in coming years.
So yeah, let's follow up on that, kind of the two pieces of that. Where are those opportunities that companies can do, or women of color? And then, in that, it kind of leads into that pathways. A little bit of why is that happening, but a little bit of how can we create those pathways? We did a report in early September talking about the pathways, and the sort of takeaways were be opportunistic, look at sponsorship, build the network. And we try to dive in a little bit for what that looks like for women of color. So can we kind of go into some of those details? And maybe, we were talking previously, Anna and I, about sort of transparency, both within and externally, about the pathways.
Yeah, I think one of the things we should celebrate is, especially in companies and corporations, great strides have been made in the recruitment of women, right? And the recruitment of creating more diversity, both from a gender standpoint and from a racial standpoint. So I think we should definitely celebrate that. And you're seeing those numbers, right? For companies that are sharing their workforce data, we see a more general diverse workforce. But I think persistently, we see that ceiling, or those ceilings for some of us, where there's multiple ceilings, really come into play, which is where we're seeing, slower progression across the board as it relates to then what can be done and some of the opportunities. I think some of the things you mentioned, Gwen, one thing is for companies to have greater transparency, both in reporting their results, right, and holding themselves accountable. Our work is trying to help with some of that accountability so we can track and measure and really celebrate and see where the opportunities are. So companies being more transparent about what their results are, what their goals are as it relates to their workforce is important. But I think equally important is being transparent about what it takes. What are those criterias that it wants in terms of whatever the roles are we're talking about, right? The C-suite roles, the CEO roles, the board roles, and being more transparent about what are those criterias and being able to have honest discussions with their emerging leaders about where the development opportunities are, and also helping and working with individuals to close those gaps where needed, and giving them the set of responsibilities that allow them to check all the boxes and the criteria to get to the next level. So this concept of transparency and really honest conversations and the sponsorship of women to allow them to take on those additional responsibilities is very critical.
I love
And
that.
I want to add,
Yeah, go
I
ahead.
was just going to add in on that, because, transparency is key, but it really, as you're saying, Anna, is really succession planning. And I really encourage other companies to, or even companies inside, to say, look, what is our succession plan? Make that transparent, because even what we've seen in the Fortune 500, we've seen women step out of those seats and be filled with roles that are not women, right? And the seats that we hold, we want to keep them. So I think even in corporations need to start looking and saying, okay, how do we have these succession plans internally? And how can we be transparent about our succession plan? And I think that once we start seeing that, we'll be able to make the difference in the numbers. And there's a lot of women out there. And even when they're at other companies, we should be thinking, okay, if this woman, if we have 2 or 3 women ready for this role, maybe we can even transfer them to other companies. So I think there's a lot of cross-company acknowledgement that we can have to really be intentional about getting those women into those C-suite roles.
Yeah, I think one of the things that constantly still comes up in conversations that is troubling is always this question about, there's this comment about readiness, right? Whether it's women are being promoted or they're not ready for the role, or people of color or not. I really always challenge that, as I want, if you believe they are not ready and someone's been employed by the company for a while, I would say, why do you believe they're not ready? Is it because those opportunities weren't given to them so that they can be more ready? Or is it you perceive them not ready through a biased lens of whatever you believe readiness is, right? I think many studies have shown it is not about there not being enough women. There's actually plenty of women who are ready, right? And are willing to take on roles and opportunities. They just have to be given the chance to do so. Just like we've given men many of chances, right? In prior generations, we have to give people the chances to basically round out their responsibilities and their skill sets as needed throughout their career.
Well, and I want to pick up on a little bit on that too, because it's sort of the chances relates to what criteria are you looking at, right? To make that advancement was the point you made earlier, Anna. And Kimber, I know you did a fair amount of the interviews for kind of the pathways. And then we hear the word P&L responsibility, right? And then Kimber, you said, let's maybe across companies, exchange and get different, which is something different than sort of how we looked at it 50 years ago. How do the pathways, like, what are we looking at today in terms of those pathways? Because that different and innovative pathway also looks to like the different and innovative criteria. And I think to what you're saying, Anna, which is, how do we look at this when we're talking about advancement?
Well, when they're exactly as you said, Gwen, and I think as Anna said too, is, really, it's not, hey, we're doing a search for this role. It should be, we have someone ready for this role. And P&L responsibility, C200 is really based on P&L responsibility. That's the requirement to be a C200 member. And, we encourage all women, if you can get access to the P&L in the company and exposure to that, that's going to help you excel in the company, and that's going to help you in your C-suite roles. So I think that, P&L training, financial literacy is so important in a company, and it shouldn't be when we have, that role open, who's ready for it. There should be people in line ready for it, especially women in line ready for it. So I think I encourage all CEOs to really, bring that transparency in the P&L to other executives in the company and filter it down even to the manager level. So they're very aware and very adaptable when they're ready to run that P&L.
Just on this, we've been talking about it through the lens of the company. I know we have a lot of women on with us today. One of the things I do see is more women willing to, whether it's switch jobs, switch roles, switch companies, in order to get those P&L responsibilities, right? So I think if you're a manager or a leader, you have to be aware of that you might have some very high talented women that could be flight risk if you don't give them actually the P&L responsibilities, because they know that they need that, right? We know that that is one of the criterias. And so in many ways, it is our responsibilities, to Kimber's point, to make sure we are giving our teams the chance to develop and pick up those skills.
Yeah, I heard somebody mention it last week that was also saying, a lot of women have left corporate America, gone out and started their own business, come back and consult to corporate America, right? Which has come down and say the same thing. If I'd had this opportunity or this kind of thing. And so there's an interesting narrative, I think, going on. We always end these with a little bit of some call to action, right? What should companies and organizations can be doing? A lot of people talk about what should women of color be doing? Kimber, let's start with you. What's your piece of advice? What's the call to action?
Sure. So we're seeing a lot of companies put to internal women networks, right? Internally, which I think is fantastic. Women's groups internally. We are big advocates of networking for women. So I encourage all companies to network externally and get access. And that's what's so unique about the WBC. When you started off the LinkedIn Live with, over 80 organizations that have joined WBC and what we're doing to really make change. If we look at, just women in corporations, they need to start networking and working around other women and getting like-minded women with them and getting that support, getting those sponsors, getting those mentors. to really help them and be intentional about their career paths.
Absolutely. Anna?
Yeah, building on that, I think we would all agree, and the numbers show that, right? Women of color have been left behind a bit in the women's movement. And so there's a lot of opportunities to catch up and to create those allyships. I see very strong women's networks, and women of color should be part of those networks. But I also think women of color can create allies with each other too, and also with men. I think that is very important, right? We should not be insular. We have to be allies with each other, building on what Kimber's saying. And for companies, I've seen some of my clients through my Deloitte role and through Ascend's clients and through companies that work with WBC, companies that are really intentional about creating a certain demographic and a certain type of leadership in their boardroom or in the C-suite, always meet those goals. So
Yes.
they are intentional and they hold themselves accountable to that aspiration, they will achieve it. And so I think it's very important to really have companies start with that, right? And not waver from that intentionality. And when that happens, again, I think we will see the big shifts that we hope that we will have in the future.
That is actually the perfect way to kind of end it. We started off with, what was the purpose of the report, right? So it's intention, it's goals, accountability, which kind of links into transparency. And that's, I know, one thing you guys are doing at Ascend Leadership and Committee of 200, and Catalyst is other partner on the report, but all of the organizations are trying to do when we're really 2025 targets, 2030 targets, and being intentional about getting there. So thank you, Anna. Thank you, Kimber, for your insights today. And that's all we have time for. So we invite you to wbcollaborative.org to learn more about WBC's initiatives to increase women in the C-suite and boardroom, including the CEO, to address underrepresentation of women in access to capital and other industries, and to advance a pipeline of women leaders that will bring gender pay parity, diversity, equity, and inclusion to the business landscape. So join us next Thursday, where we will talk about our progress. We will be talking about how we're elevating and accelerating women's voices. And, please join us on social media, join us on our website to keep up on our progress by following us on social media at WB Collaborative on Instagram, Twitter, and LinkedIn, and have a wonderful Thursday.